It seems I need to keep having this conversation regarding Tensor chipsets. It's always surrounding the release of a new device. We spoke about the Pixel 10 Pro Fold yesterday, and I've seen a lot of nonsense this week regarding the Tensor G5 chipset. And there are two arguments that you can have about Tensor. The first one I consider legitimate, even though I disagree with it. And that's that you just disagree with what Google's doing. You understand that the company isn't striving to match Qualcomm with the Snapdragon 8 Elite, but you think it should. You think for the $1,200 that you pay for your Pixel 10 Pro XL that you deserve the same raw performance as you'd get on an S25 Ultra or a OnePlus 13. You want that high-end gaming performance for the money that you pay on a flagship device. You feel that flagship means that you should get the best of everything across the board, TPUs, NPUs, you could care less. Now, that's a valid opinion. I disagree with it. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the one that I've been seeing this week a lot of is that Google somehow tried to make a Snapdragon 8 Elite competitor and wasn't able to do it. That somehow Google doesn't know what it's doing. They just didn't put enough effort in to coming up with a chipset that could rival the raw performance of what Qualcomm has. That is absolute nonsense, and it's incorrect. And I've seen it couched in a lot of the gaming stuff, which we'll talk about, and it's just a lack of understanding of where Google is building value in these devices. So let's talk about the first one. You say that it's a $1,200 phone. I don't care. I want top of the line everything. We should have the best of the best, and there should be a more powerful chipset in the Google Pixel devices. The Tensor should be more powerful. I happen to disagree with that. I happen to disagree with that only because I've seen this movie before. I don't think it really matters how powerful the chipset is. Would I like slightly better gaming performance? Yes, but we'll talk about gaming performance in a minute. It's not as big of a problem as people make it out to be. You know, we mention it as reviewers because that's our responsibility. It's like what Derek Jeter said. You don't know the first time somebody's watching you in uniform. We sent out, because these reviews have to cover a variety of consumers. Enthusiasts are going to know that if you want a gaming device, if you're big into mobile gaming, then yeah, maybe you don't pick up a Pixel. But somebody watching a review for the first time that's about to walk into their carrier or their Best Buy making a decision might not know that. They haven't bought a device in 3 years. They don't care, whatever it happens to be. So it's always worth mentioning. But it's in the margins. We're not talking about horrible gaming performance. We're just talking about, hey, it's a step in settings above on some of these other devices. If you're doing heavy video editing, which most casual users aren't going to do anyway, you're going to see a difference because of that raw performance. But to me, the straight line speed, like in a car, doesn't really matter. And we've seen that play out a couple times in the last few years. You can't tell me that last year's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 was used to its max capacity. We haven't hit the ceiling on these devices, and we seldom do, even years later. So we could talk about future-proofing all we want, but there was a time earlier in the year where Samsung was saying that it couldn't even put the Now Brief and some of the AI stuff and whatever because it didn't have the capacity on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. It couldn't put that on year-old hardware. I'm telling you that's going to keep happening. There are going to be new features. There are going to be new things that these companies use to differentiate new products from old products. And they're going to use that whatever they put in the new chipset to kind of exclude the older devices and the older chipsets. So this overhead that we get, this massive bump in power that we never use. I was hearing about desktop class applications last year for the Snapdragon 8 Elite. That's great. Where are they on mobile? You see some of them on these laptops, and that's fine. But I'm talking about the actual handheld devices themselves. Where are these things? You got to get developers on board. You got to get apps. All these manufacturers have to get on board, especially with the chipsets for Qualcomm. The Snapdragon, they have to. There's so many barriers you have to get past before you could get the full capability of these chipsets on these devices. And by the time that you get everybody mobilized to do it, you're already moving on to the next technology. So I really don't see the need for all this overhead in these devices. Now, What is Google focusing on? Google's focusing on the NPUs, the TPUs, and the tensor processing, whatever it is, for the neural pathways and all these things that they come up with for AI for tensor. Who's to say that a few years down the line, that's not what is important for overhead? It's not necessarily the raw horsepower. It's these TPUs and the improvement there that help Google bring these new Gemini features to legacy devices. And that the chipset that we all pointed at and laughed because it can't game as well and it doesn't get the raw benchmark scores might actually perform better long term. And we don't have a lot of evidence of this yet. But I'll tell you this. Everybody can jump up and down and say, well, I want the most powerful chipset in there because 7 years of support means all the way down the line. If you go on your Pixel 6 and you download Material 3 Expressive on Android 16, that is a smooth performer. It actually improved my Pixel 6. Despite the visual stuff and all the stuff that it added, yes, I don't get a full slate of Gemini features, but I do get the nice little AI enhancements for my photos. It lists it there. Gemini Live works well. There are things that Tensor has been built to do from the beginning that was Google's plan that are now, I think, going to show. And you can't, if you want to sit there and point to, well, years from now it won't be good. Well, my performance is pretty darn good on a Pixel 6 for a 4 or 5-year-old device. So far, that argument that I need all this extra overhead that I get with the Snapdragons doesn't really come true. So that's why I disagree with that. Google is building value a different way. You may not agree with it. You may want a different type of phone, but I will tell you this, and this is something I've said before. We saw this movie already. If you wanted that from a Pixel, why didn't you buy a Pixel 4 XL? And if you're a card-carrying member of a Pixel 4 XL and you were legitimately disappointed when Google moved away from Snapdragon chipsets, I got no beef with you. Legitimate. You get a check mark. Fine. You can absolutely disagree. Now let's go to the other argument, because this is the one that frustrates me to no end. Tensor chipsets can game, right? I've heard a lot this week that games are unplayable and all this. Genshin Impact runs fine. Bump it down to medium settings, it runs fine. Pixel 10 Pro Fold runs fine. Pixel XL, fine. Okay? Let's get that out of the way. These old arguments about the overheating and all these things, they're gone. Battery life is good now. Efficiency is good. I hear some noise back and forth about battery life, but these things are fine. But if you think for 1 second that the Tensor G5 isn't exactly what Google set out to do, then I don't know what you're looking at. I don't know how anybody could sit there and say, well, Google's just not capable of coming up with a more powerful chipset. Google wasn't trying to make a more powerful chipset. There were rumors a while back that there might be a pro version of the Tensor chipsets to put in these things. That is when, if Google said, you know what, we're coming up with a Tensor G5 Pro, and that's what we're going to put in the Pro XL, and that's the one that you're going to have for gaming, and that's the one that's going to be a little extra money to compete with the S25 or S26 Ultra, and that's going to be the ones you want to get. You want to do all that high-end stuff, then that's what you're going to buy, one of these with a Tensor G5 Pro. And if at that point it can't do those things, then you eat Google's lunch. Then you say, you know what, you just didn't try hard enough, your engineers didn't do the job, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is still the way to go. That's when you can make that argument. You can't make it right now. Google isn't trying to do that. How are you going to criticize somebody for not winning a race they didn't enter? That's, to me, what gets frustrating about these arguments, saying, well, Google just didn't try, or Google didn't try hard enough, or Google didn't make it work with Tensor. That's nonsense. And the first argument that we talked about is an important one to have. And I absolutely respect anybody making that argument. But let's not get lost in the weeds and get drowned out by the noise of these other arguments I see that make no sense whatsoever. Because we could talk about these phones all day long, and I do. But that's not one of the things that I'm willing to entertain. Because I like the fact that there is a different type of product, and the jury is still out on which one is going to succeed the best. 5 years from now, call me. If Gemini stuff, which you might not care about, I get that, but there are people who do. If Gemini stuff is running better on these older devices because of the stuff that Google did with the Tensor G5 and the upgrades to the TPU in that might be good. We'll see. It's tougher for manufacturers to dial in a Snapdragon because of the fact that it's tougher for Qualcomm to dial into specific manufacturers because there are so many phones that use it. That's why do you think you see Samsung experimenting with Exynos over and over and over again, despite the overheating, despite the poor benchmarks and performance against the Snapdragon equivalent? Why? Because they know that. It's easier for Samsung to dial in everything from the software to the hardware on something it controls from start to finish. Anyway, that's what. Tensor is fine. If you own a Pixel, you know this. If you're somebody that's a hardcore gamer, you already know not to buy a Pixel. You're going to buy something else. If you're a casual gamer, that you like the other Pixel extras, you like the cameras, you like everything else, buy your Pixel and be happy. If you made it this far, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Until next time, have that Steve-licious day.